Washington DC នៅខែតុលាទី23ឆ្នាំ2013នៅបនខួបឆ្នាំទី22នៃកិច្ចព្រមព្រៀងសន្តិភាពទីក្រុងប៉ារីសឆ្នាំ1991ស្ដីពីកម្ពុជាជនជាតិខ្មែរអាមេរិកបានធ្វើសន្និសីទសារព័ត៌មានមួយនៅឯក្លាប់សារព័ត៌មានជាតិនៅទីក្រុង Washington DC ប្រមាណ4ប្លុកពីសតវិមានសូមអស់លោកស្ដាប់ការនិយាយរបស់លោក Moorstein ដែលជាមេធាវីរបស់សមាគមបណ្ដាញពលរដ្ឋខ្មែរសម្រាប់ប្រទេសកម្ពុជា
not to recapitulate what's already been stated, but to try to take what has already been stated and go from there. I think, as you all know, the Paris peace talks commenced as a result of defeat. At least the original assembly of this is by the defeat of the Khmer Rouge and the invasion of Cambodia by the Vietnamese. The issue developed over a period of time that the chaos that was occurring in Cambodia was not only affecting Cambodia, but was affecting the foreign policy of not only the United States, but China, the Soviet Union, and most of the world, in fact, as a result of the proxy aspect of some of the politics that were going on at that time. So when the Paris peace agreement was concluded in 1991, it brought together kind of odd bedfellows. You have on one side the Khmer Rouge, some of the remnants of the Lon Nol government, and King Sihanouk, all of whom at one time fought one another. And on the other side, you had the Vietnamese, who at one time were the allies of at least a number of the other parties. The point that was being made at that time was that the international community recognized that there had to be a peaceful mechanism for resolving the conflict that occurred in Cambodia. And so what occurred was the framework that essentially established not only a long-term peace treaty, but the following organization of government. One of the first things that was required was the enactment of the Constitution. And there was a mandate in the treaty itself for provisions in the Constitution as a result of the peace treaty. Most of those mandates found their way into the Constitution. The Constitution is actually it's pretty well written. There are a number of guarantees in there that require, in terms of human rights, the adherence to the UN Charter and the Universal Declaration of Rights. Things like peaceful assembly, the right to vote, the right to express an opinion, freedom of religion. All of the types of freedoms that at least Western countries have experienced for years and years were continuing on in the Constitution. Interestingly, the election provisions were not very well stated. There was perhaps one line that was contained in the Constitution that basically said that elections would be free and fair, but it was left up to either decrees or sub-decrees to figure out how that would work. What's happened, of course, as everybody knows, is that the government developed a one-party state as a result of corruption. Instead of an independent judiciary, you had a judiciary that was beholden to Hun Sen. The legislature itself was controlled by Hun Sen, and of course, you passed for an executive, which was Hun Sen as well. And so what you had was a return to a one-party state. The Paris Peace Agreement never has terminated. There is no termination date in the Paris Peace Agreement. And as a result of that, it continues on. And these guarantees that have just been discussed continue to be ongoing guarantees under the framework of the Paris Peace Agreement. So 22 years after it has been enacted, many of those promises have yet to be fulfilled. And what we saw in the election was quite amazing, because what you had was a tremendous amount of evidence, vote rigging, corruption, the inability basically of the people to express their will, which has been described both in the Paris Peace Agreements and the Constitution as being essential to the creation of democracy. So as a result of that, what you have is a lack of checks and balances. And what you then have is the inability, or apparent inability, of an opposition group to freely express their views in such a way as to peacefully change the government. This type of thing, of course, is very interesting to any of us who have lived through this entire period, because if there's been any lesson that we have all learned, it is that as the younger people grow, their view of the world is not necessarily shaped by the experiences of their parents, and as a result of that, they have a more idealistic and fresher view, and that is what's going on now in Cambodia. They are shaped by social media, by news, by the idealism that allows democracy to take over and to express their views, free markets, and so forth. What's happened now, of course, is the traditional issue of rule of law versus force. Hun Sen is in this position now under the current regime, where he has to balance a pretense of civility and at the same time still stay in power. So what you have is you have very subtle type of force that's being used, intimidation and so forth. But that is required virtually across the board is the appeal to the international community. Now, I got involved with this group, as you probably all know, because I was involved in the Kokong sugar taping condemnation. I do international work, but I'm also a land use attorney. And what happened was, as many of you know, is I went to Cambodia to review the take. Typically, you have a framework of human rights. There are few human rights courts in the world. There are few human rights attorneys in the world, and the law on human rights is very complex. The commercial understanding is very simple in comparison. What's happened in Cambodia is that Hun Sen and the government has allowed interests to basically take property and to take the personal interests of the people who own that property. And what we were able to demonstrate when I went over there was that there was a simple concept. I was asked by Kek Gallagher, who I know many of you know, who was also very instrumental in bringing together the parties on the Paris Peace Agreement. Kek Gallagher said to me, find an international way to deal with this because the courts in Cambodia are corrupt. And what we did was, I said, it's fairly simple, I think. Basically, if the government illegally takes somebody's land, the land still belongs to those people. If the land still belongs to the farmers, for example, who's taken, and so do the crops. And if the crops still belong to those people, wherever the crops go, so go the claims. In this particular case, the crops went to the UK, and we are now involved in full-scale litigation in the UK against Tate Lyle, KSL, who is controlled by one of the cronies of Lee Young Pat, who is one of the cronies of Hun Sen, and as a result of that, you're getting pushback for the first time in terms of effectiveness. That was done on an international level, it was done on a commercial level, as opposed to just a human rights level. You know, John Kennedy said something that I think has always been very prophetic, and of course, he took it from Jefferson.
បណ្ដាញពលរដ្ឋខ្មែរសូមអរគុណលោកអ្នកដែលបានចំណាយពេលស្ដាប់